This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
With there being no NFL this weekend, that has freed us up to talk about a lot of other sports across the sporting universe. We've already discussed some EPL, we've talked some NASCAR, and now it's time to talk NHL and UFC. And who better to do so than Austin Swaim? We're going to bring him on for today, breaking down NHL futures at the All-Star break. Then we'll get you ready for this weekend's UFC betting card. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here by Austin Swaim. He is a senior editor for FanDuel Research. You can find him on Twitter at @ASwaim3. He, of course, is the host of our UFC betting and DFS podcast over on the numberFire daily fantasy podcast feed. Austin, happy Friday to you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I know you're doing great as well. For those who in the audience who don't know, who don't read over at FanDuel Research maybe or haven't seen it, the one thing Jim and I bond over is cars going in circles. We both love NASCAR. They are back going in circles this week. His betting guide on FanDuel Research yesterday. My DFS helper coming this weekend. So excited to be back.
Reminds me I have to send you my win sims, which I've not done
absolutely
yet. But also in addition to it being NASCAR time, I also have a couple new NASCAR bobbleheads, which I need to get on the shelf back here. As you can see, there's only the Bubba Wallace. I can't figure out. There we go. The Bubba Wallace Funko Pop is the one thing back here. We have two Elliott Sadler bobbleheads as a result of my head-to-head with Brandon Gadula, and I need to find a place to put them. So we're gonna do some crafting later on today to try to decide where those go. But NASCAR being back on the menu is very much necessary right now.
For sure.
Alrighty. So what we're going to do today with Austin is talk about his read on the NHL futures market here at the All-Star break. We'll talk about the Stanley Cup future odds, talk some playoff odds as well. See where he sees value there over at FanDuel Sportsbook, and then going to get you ready for this weekend's UFC card. It is between Roman Dolidze and Nasruddin Imavov. I had to write that out phonetically to make sure I didn't butcher it, and still butchered it regardless. But we'll talk about that main event and where Austin sees value for both money lines and props later on. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. As mentioned, EPL Match Week 23 breakdown with Austin Cass is now up over at FanDuel and the FanDuel Podcast Network, breaking down his thoughts on where he sees value for this weekend at FanDuel Sportsbook. I also talked about the NASCAR clash at the Coliseum. With one bet I like there and one driver I'm keeping an eye on during practice on Saturday. And also, if you want my first thoughts on Super Bowl 58, that is up on Monday here on the Covering the Spread podcast feed. 5 Super Bowl related shows coming up next week, Monday through Friday. So make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to check us out on the FanDuel YouTube page and FanDuel TV Plus as well. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers, join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet or bet of $5 or more wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and Vermont. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522 4,700, visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's begin things here, Austin, by talking about the NHLs. We are here at the All-Star break, and as of right now, the Colorado Avalanche are the betting favorites over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Are you an Avalanche fan? I know you're in Denver, but are you an Avs fan?
I am. I was at a game just exactly 30 days ago. I probably will be again before the end of the season, too.
Okay, I was going to say, because your rooting interests are all across the country, so I didn't want to just assume that you were. But okay, so Avs fan here to check in. They're 8-1 to win it right now, and Stanley Cup playoffs can be pretty volatile, and I think that that's baked into this number with no clear runaway favorite right now. So any value for you in the Stanley Cup odds right now, Austin?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit. As someone who cheers for the Avalanche, I have to check my bias, of course, and I don't see them as the Cup favorites currently. I'm not alone on that. They're 8th in numberFire's nerd-based power rankings, the nerd metric there. Just kind of some issues in goal. Alexander Georgiev, 48th of 85 qualifying goalies, so he's not had the same type of season he had last year, and the roster will get stronger. Gabriel Landeskog is supposed to ramp up for the playoffs, but I think that's more projection than anything. To me, I think there's at least a little bit of value here because I would favor the Edmonton Oilers outright over any of the teams in the chase pack, Avalanche, Bruins, Panthers, whoever you name it, because we always knew it was more of an if than or it was a when than an if with the Oilers because they have Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, these outstanding skaters. They've always been able to score, but this year they're playing defense. Tops in the NHL with a 58.0 expected goals for rate. They've been undone by goaltending historically, but right now Stuart Skinner has shaken off a tough start. He's 12th in hockey in goals saved above expectation, 12.04. They now are playing defense. They're top 5 in expected goals allowed. The goaltending has been solid. That's how they ripped off, 13 of 15 wins here in this recent stretch. I think they are the favorites, and I don't really, Jim, you and I both can kind of fall for the Cowboys every year. I don't really buy into the can't get over the hump, can't do this, can't do that. They've been in these deep playoff series. They were in the Western Conference Finals 2 years ago, I believe, against the Avalanche. They've been there. They just haven't had the goaltending. I think they've got it, and I would favor them in this market.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the playoffs have been the big bugaboo for the Oilers, but it is a pretty volatile sport, and I think that's true for the NFL too, where you can have a down game and it can ruin your entire season for some teams. And for the Oilers, it's just, like I said, it's a volatile sport where it's tough to really pin down who's the stronger team over such a short series. So right now the Oilers plus 850 at FanDuel Sportsbook to win the Stanley Cup Finals. How sustainable do you think that improvement on defense is? Like, do you fully buy in that this is going to stick around for them?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I feel like they've always had the skating talent to make it work. And the way they've arranged their line combinations this year, I am a big believer that consistent line combinations both help offensive and defensively with chemistry and communication. They've had the top line, Zach Hyman, McDavid, and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins together all year. Evan Bouchard plays with that group. They've added a couple of names to their second and third defensive pairings that have seemed to have helped. They've never really had a problem in expected goals differential, even with defensive issues. That's how good they are at scoring. I do think the goaltending, it's always a guess. Like last year, we had Sergei Bobrovsky struggle all year, and then all of a sudden he was lights out in the playoffs, got the Panthers to the Stanley Cup Finals. Like that can go up and down quickly, but Skinner's talented, so I think he can sustain that level of play any more than any of these other volatile options.
All right, so Austin has Connor McDavid getting his first Stanley Cup with the Edmonton Oilers at plus 850 is the best value as of right now. FanDuel Sportsbook does also have yes-no playoff odds, I believe, for pretty much every team right now. So when you look at those, Austin, any you're eyeing to buy or fade as we get set for the All-Star break?
Yeah, usually this market is a ton of fun because the hockey playoff picture can stay layered for a long time. The way this particular year has broken down, we kind of have a good idea of a majority of the playoff field. In the West, you look at Vegas or Los Angeles would be the two teams that might potentially slip out. I feel strongly about them as teams than anybody in the chase pack. Predators, the Blues and Kraken both have offensive issues, and then the Flames just shipped off their captain and best players. So I'm not exactly looking to target them in this moment. And then you go back to the East. There is an established core of teams that are pretty much in, either off the board or minus 370 or greater on FanDuel. Bruins, Panthers, Lightning, Maple Leafs, Rangers, and Hurricanes. I think all those guys are ostensible locks to make it. Then you have this gaggle of teams that could compete for the last two spots. Penguins, they're fourth in expected goals for rate, good skating, inconsistent goaltending. Flyers are 13th in that category. The Devils are 15th in that category. But the one name that interestingly doesn't fit here, despite being 7 points up on Pittsburgh and New Jersey, the Detroit Red Wings. They're minus 128 to not make the playoffs on FanDuel Sportsbook. And the odds kind of speak themselves. You get this cushion, but there's a reason why they're favored not to make it. They have the 8th worst expected goals for rate in the league, 4th largest over performance in that category compared to how many goals they're putting on paper versus how many they should be. They've been, I don't want to say lucky, but you can be fortunate in a short period of time in hockey because scoring chances don't always translate to goals. And they have a volatile goaltending situation. It's not even a situation where they have a Vezina contender. Alex Lyon just came over from Florida. He's been great for the moment, but Lyon, James Reimer, anyone who has been following hockey for a long time knows those guys have had their ups and their downs. And one downward trend for both of them in the right way, the Wings will lose ground here fast to some of these teams that are putting up offense much more consistently.
So as you mentioned, they are currently even money to make the playoffs, minus 128 to miss, but they also they get to keep the points they've gotten so far.
Yep.
Is their cushion big enough where you have pause about this, or is there so much time left where it's not gonna worry you too much with the minus 128?
Yeah, I'm not worried about the cushion because 7 points, it is a little bit harder in hockey to make up than you think. It's not like making up direct wins in the standings because you can push through to overtime. But like I said, the Bruins currently skating as a top 5 team in the NHL. Not the Bruins, the Penguins, excuse me. Skating as a top 5 team in the NHL. The Devils are a little bit further down, but they've been without Jack Hughes for a good portion of this first half. He's actually missing the All-Star game as well, but is expected back shortly after that. Those teams were Stanley Cup favorites, like entering the year and within the top 6 of the Stanley Cup odds. They are really solid organizations and clubs. 7 points is going to go away very, very quickly if those guys get on a roll and kind of perform to what we expected them to.
Yeah, still a lot of season left. So the 7 points, they're not a big enough cushion in Austin's eyes for the Wings, liking them to miss the playoffs at minus 128. Any other NHL futures you're eyeing as we enter the All-Star break here, Austin?
Yeah, so I'm looking at a point total here with what I'm calling the unluckiest team in hockey. I'm looking at the Los Angeles Kings to record over 98.5 points, minus 118. They are 2-10 in overtime games. And if you're not familiar with NHL overtime, it's 3-on-3. It can be a little bit more random than 5-on-5 skating throughout the entire game before that. Just hasn't gone their way there. And they are 5th overall in the NHL in expected goals for rate. They got off to a nice start. Cam Talbot, the veteran in goal, actually was performing well for them, and then he kind of fell off a cliff. But now David Rittich has taken over as their starter. He's been sensational, 11th in goals saved above expectation in the last 30 days. He was great in their 4-2 win right on Wednesday, one of the last games before the All-Star break. I still think they're the second best team in the Pacific behind Edmonton. They will need 1.26 points per game the rest of the way to make it. They're at 1.17 so far, and that's even with all the bad overtime luck, even with the Cam Talbot struggles in December to early January. I really like this mark a lot. I feel comfortable projecting them over 100 points for the season.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the 56 points for them, they already have as many overtime losses they had the entirety of last year, and they're at one below where they were in 2022, which is actually the highest number they had since 2014-2015.
Yeah.
So a lot of OT losses for the Kings, which has worked against them. 56 points right now for them. Austin likes them to go over 98.5, minus 118 right now over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Let's talk some UFC right now. We got a pretty decent card over at FanDuel Sportsbook, and that is headlined by Roman Dolidze taking on Nasruddin Imavov. Right now at FanDuel Sportsbook, Imavov is a favorite, minus 170 on the money line. That is lengthened a bit, or as that shortened a bit. It was minus 166 earlier yesterday. It is now minus 170. What's your read on this fight, Austin? Anything stand out to you from a betting perspective at FanDuel for this one?
Yeah, I pretty much was in line with the books when this fight opened. I have an analytical model still working through some margin for error things, but I had Nasruddin Imavov 51.3% to win this fight. And so I was closer to how this fight is opened. He has obviously taken money throughout the week, and I understand why. He's the younger guy in this space. He is probably the more skilled striker. Roman Dolidze is kind of hard to handicap as a fighter at middleweight. He used to fight at 205 pounds. Now at 185, he's just big. And I wrote in my article that's coming on FanDuel Research today, his fighting style is kind of like that of a grizzly bear going after its prey. He kind of clubs right hands at people and mauls them against the cage. But 1.68% knockdown rate for Dolidze, elite power. 1.7 submission attempts per 15, still doesn't have a submission in UFC, so he's due for some regression to actually capitalize on those before long. He won at light heavyweight in UFC against some really talented competition, 185. These guys are really outgunned by his physicality. Had a very tight fight with Marvin Vettori, who's a former title challenger in this division. And then Imavov, like I said, is much more of a technical striker, much more the new thing at 28, 53% striking accuracy, 58% striking defense. But these guys have fought a mutual opponent. Phil Hawes was the mutual opponent. Imavov ceded 4 takedowns to him. He ended up losing that fight by decision. Roman Dolidze knocked out Hawes in the first round. And that type of MMA math is not always perfect, but it gives you these guys should be competitive against each other. The way Imavov struggled to defend takedowns, here comes a grizzly bear that lands them at a pretty efficient clip, 50%. So like I said, my model kind of leans Dolidze at this number, especially as this number shortens on his end, or lengthens on his end, I should say. And then I prefer a little bit longer fight here because Dolidze controlling with takedowns. Imavov has never had an early finish in UFC. Dolidze never been finished in UFC. All of these things kind of gear toward a longer fight. And this fight is a -110 pick'em to start round 4. I lean the over on that with these guys leaning toward 25 minutes, but I don't have any action on this fight officially yet.
Okay, so the money line for Dolidze is +138. You had mentioned the common opponent. How much stock do you put in that, especially when it's two fighters who are it seems like, at least based on what you said, very different in their style? It's something you can still look at despite the fact they're different fighters, or is it a bit more nuanced than that, where you kind of have to take things with a heavy grain of salt?
The buzzword that I use with it is transitive skills. And like, for instance, Imavov had struggles defending Phil Hawes as an American wrestler. Dolidze has similar types of wrestling. He's more of a Greco-Roman base, but it's close enough for government work in terms of MMA wrestling. I look at transitive skills within fights. And I especially love this. Like, if I get two strikers and then they have a striker as a mutual opponent, then I'm starting to cook with gas. Like you said, Hawes is not a perfect example because his susceptibility is power. Dolidze was able to secure a takedown early in that fight, but it had a lot to do with he has very powerful punches and Phil couldn't take them. Imavov not really having that same power extended the fight against Hawes. So it is a good point. And that's why a lot of times they call MMA math where this guy beat this guy, so he should beat this guy. It doesn't work that way because styles make fights. Everyone knows that cliche. But to me, at least, it tangibly gauged level. And I think these guys are on the same level. And that's why my model had it so close when it opened. And it was close when it opened. And now the younger guy is taking money throughout the week.
How long would you need Dolidze to lengthen in order to feel confident in the value there? Because, like you said, he's seen Imavov shorten here to -170, which means that Dolidze is inherently lengthening. How far does that have to move before you reach a breaking point where you say, okay, I'm going to buy into what my model is saying and actually bet the money line for Dolidze?
I think if I got to +150, I'm not sure exactly what that is implied, but I assume we're getting into that 40%. 40% range is probably where it's without of the margin for error in my model, to a point where, okay, I'm going to have to take it. And by the way, with this line trending that way, I'm going to have to be watching on Saturday, especially as we take fight with even during the card starting, as we're moving up to the fight. I might not get to wager on this until I get to that +150, that 40% implied mark.
Yeah, the implied odds right now, +138 are 42%, and +150 is 40%. That 2 percentage points does make a really big difference. We should be price sensitive. So I think that being cautious, keeping an eye on the market, seeing where it goes, and being picky with stuff like that is always going to be a good thing. So a lean towards Dolidze right now for Austin, potentially more firm in that if it were to get to +150 at some point. A lot of other fights on this card, though, Austin. So which of the money lines do you see as being values at FanDuel Sportsbook?
Yeah, I'm taking an underdog shot on the early prelims when I look at Pete Rodriguez. He's taking on Themba Gorimbo on the early prelims. It's not exactly the most glamorous fight on the card, but I do think there is betting value here. Even without any sort of model, I wouldn't model Rodriguez's sample of about 4 minutes anyway. These fighters are way too flawed on each side to me to have this wide of a gap. Pete Rodriguez, I think his true weakness at this point is his size. He's 5'9". He's probably closer to what you'd see for a 155-pounder. just can't make the weight. Like, he pulled out of his last fight because he wasn't able to make the weight. His opponent made fun of him for it, but he's back at 170 pounds where he fought his first 2 fights at 1-1. Could not have had a more stark gap in competition. Was way overwhelmed against Jack Della Maddalena, top 10 guy in the division in his debut. And then he got Mike Jackson, who was the guy that beat up on former WWE star CM Punk. It was like a wild girth of competition. Rodriguez was a minus 1100 favorite in the second fight, was a huge underdog in the first fight. So we haven't really seen him in a fight that I think goes both ways, but he trains at the MMA lab in Phoenix with Sean O'Malley, Jared Cannonier, Marcus McGee, some really high level guys that are winning quite a bit in UFC. I love leaning on those training camps and those training regiments. And that gym is well known for takedown defense. And Rodriguez is 100% thus far. Themba Gorimbo needs to wrestle because he has not shown a lot of striking prowess thus far. 42% striking defense, some losses by knockout in his amateur career. And he's really shown very little finishing equity of his own. He had all this control time, over 8 minutes against Takashi Sato, could not find even one submission attempt. I think if Rodriguez has 15 minutes to work, Gorimbo starts to tire from his wrestling advances. He has great hands. He throws 22.5 significant strikes a minute, just about, and lands about half of them historically from a great striking gym. I don't think he should be plus 200 in this spot. I might line this far closer to a pick'em. So I love Pete Rodriguez on the money line this week, but I will say, I see a lot of interest in his round 1 knockout prop. Like, he's just going to go in and starch Gorimbo. You have to be very careful about that because it all determines his own aggressiveness in the first round. Maybe his game plan is to weather the storm. I prefer his money line versus digging into any specific round prop, submission prop, anything like that. I prefer his money line because we don't know how this fight will progress. Rodriguez has never been outside the first round professionally.
Okay, so plus 198, the money line right now, and Pete Rodriguez taking on Themba Gorimbo. That is on the prelim card for this UFC weekend. What do you lean on when you don't have a lot of data on fighters? Are you trying to watch tape of them at lower levels? How are you deciding how you want to view fighters like that when we don't have a lot in like actual UFC competition to lean on?
So I do my best to, based on the historical results, if I have any sort of elo. Now, Rodriguez is terrible. Like, I don't have any tangible measuring stick of a guy that's even been in or around UFC. But like you said, you can lean on regional footage. That largely drives UFC betting lines. A majority of people who do this professionally, they are looking through a tape study model. When I look at this, I lean on things like gyms and historically what they're known for their training regimen. I do look at analysis a little bit. I look at historical results, but also Pete Rodriguez landed 22 significant strikes in the first round on a top 10 guy. His striking offense wasn't the problem in that fight. It was the defense, but I feel more comfortable knowing I've seen that against a super high level opponent when I know Gorimbo's striking offense isn't going to be nearly as dangerous or potent.
Okay, so Austin likes Pete Rodriguez to win against Gorimbo, plus 198, the money line there at FanDuel Sportsbook. What about props? You got props up, I think, for all fights right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. Where are you seeing value there?
So I'm gonna go through this and talk about a prop that can kind of, if you miss the boat on the line movement, you miss the best of the number, how you can still kind of get access to the same type of handicap that I have. I'm looking in the co-main event. Some people say it's the people's main event this week between Renato Moicano and Drew Dober. Money Moicano here. I could not believe how short this number is, but I'm in total agreement with it. I tweeted this out 2 weeks ago at minus 136. He has ballooned. It was minus 192 yesterday. I can't see what he's coming back at, minus 188 now.
Yeah.
So Dober's taking a little bit of money, but if you miss the boat on that, my model has value on Moicano up to minus 150. I think his submission prop method of victory is a good way to get access to it. The thing about Drew Dober is that he has gone outside the rankings, fought lower competition recently, but every time he's gotten toward the rankings, we kind of see the same deficiencies. 3-4 in the UFC career when he ceded multiple takedowns. He's lost 3 fights by submission, gave up a bunch to Brad Riddell, 5 of them submitted by Islam Makhachev, Beneil Dariush, and Olivier Aubin-Mercier. Like, these guys that are really high-level grapplers, he has trouble with them. And Renato Moicano by submission is super short for an individual outcome here at plus 160. But Moicano's the exact same type of fighter. Lands 1.66 takedowns per 15, has 6 UFC wins by submission. I am all but certain that is why he has taken so much money this week, is because it's just a fresh reminder. We haven't seen Dober face a grappler in a while. Haven't seen him face a ranked fighter in a while. But this is what we saw every time he got back into the rankings. I don't even know how realistic Dober's win path of like a knockout is in this spot. His 1.11% knockdown rate not elite by UFC standards as your over 2% is. And then Moicano has an excellent 60% striking defense himself. I think Money Moicano rolls in this spot, gets an early takedown. He submitted Brad Riddell in the first round, submitted Alexander Hernandez in the first round. It to me looks like a horrible matchup on paper for Dober. So the line moved exactly how I thought it was going to. But if you missed the line movement on the money line, I still think this is why it moved. And I think there is value in this plus 160 number.
That is Renato Moicano taking on Drew Dober, where the Renato Moicano by submission prop at FanDuel Sportsbook is plus 160. That sounds short relative to what you'll typically see in this market. Is that correct?
It is. And I think when you see prohibitive numbers like that in these individual method of victory categories on FanDuel, there is a reason for that. It is because that particular prop, I actually saw it in different spots around plus 250, plus 280 when other books release early. FanDuel took that information in. They saw how quickly those numbers shortened. That's what all of this anecdotal evidence, as well as if you look at the round total on a different tab, Jim, under 1.5 rounds is minus 124. What does that imply? Fight is less than 7.5 minutes long. Some of that is Dober's knockout equity, but like I said, I think that's personally overvalued. This number two also keeps dropping. All of these anecdotal evidence markers. I think that a lot of sharp bettors are thinking like I am, that Moicano gets the takedown, a bunch of round one submissions himself, and he just kind of rolls in this spot. And that's what I'm going with, which, by the way, if you play daily fantasy on FanDuel, that's a big score on FanDuel. So I'd be looking at Moicano maybe in your MVP slot as well.
I might be bored enough to actually dabble in those UFC DFS streets this weekend. So I appreciate the heads up there. And if I want more tips on it, I can just check out the Heat Check with Austin later on today over on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed to get the full insights there. He'll talk some betting there as well, break down that aspect of it, as he will every single week on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. But things Austin likes for this weekend: Pete Rodriguez to win, plus 198, and then Moicano by submission, that is plus 160. That is Austin Swaim. Make sure you check him out on Twitter at Swaim3. Find his work over at FanDuel Research, and of course on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed every week with the UFC DFS and betting breakdown. Austin, enjoy this weekend. Good luck to you. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good, Jim. See you soon, bud.
And again, that podcast will be over on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Find Austin on Twitter at Swaim3. I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. You can find me on Threads at Jim.Sonis, and check out FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Back with you again next week with 5 shows breaking down Super Bowl 58. It's going to be a blast. We'll talk to all of you soon. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.